Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Gibbs Drops the Needle. Unfortunately, we have another passing in the music world to go over today, as David Clayton-Thomas, the lead singer of Blood, Sweat, and Tears, has passed away at the age of 84. This is kind of just weird timing because we have just went over the life and career of Clive Davis, and one of the bands that he had worked with and signed was Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So only a couple days after Clive Davis's passing do we have the passing of David Clayton-Thomas, the lead singer of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Again, he was 84 years old. The musician's publicist shared with Billboard on Thursday, June 25th, that he had passed away peacefully the evening prior at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. They did not provide a cause of death, but the rep did add that a memorial benefit concert will soon be held in Clayton-Thomas's honor, supporting Peace Builders Canada, which is an organization that promotes restorative justice for youth, which he championed for years up until he passed away. He is survived by his daughters Ashley Clayton-Thomas and Christine Graham. So unfortunately, we're getting all too familiar with how we are going to be handling things, so we're going to get into the career of David Clayton-Thomas and learn more about him and honor his legacy. David Clayton-Thomas was born in Kingston upon Thames, Surrey, England, the son of Fred Tomset and decorated Canadian soldier of World War II. Clayton-Thomas's mother, Frida May, played the piano and met Tomset when she came to entertain the troops at a London hospital. After the war, the family settled in Willowdale, Toronto. Clayton-Thomas's father was an abusive alcoholic who beat him. By the time Clayton-Thomas was 14, he had left home and was sleeping in parked cars and abandoned buildings and stealing food and clothing to survive. He was arrested several times for vagrancy, petty theft, and street brawls, and spent much of his teens in various jails and reformatories, including the Birchwash Industrial Farm. He inherited a love for music from his mother, and when an old guitar came into his possession, left behind by an outgoing inmate, he began to teach himself to play. Upon his release from the detention center in 1962, he gravitated to the Yonge Street Strip in Toronto. Rhythm and blues migrating up from Detroit and Chicago was the music of choice on the Strip, and Arkansas's rockabilly pioneer Ronnie Hawkins recognized the formidable talent of the young Sonny Thomas and took him under his wing. It wasn't long before he was fronting his own bands. The first was called David Clayton-Thomas and the Fabulous Shays. By this time, he had changed his surname to put some distance between his new life and his troubled teenage years. In 1964, Clayton-Thomas and the Shays recorded a rendition of John Lee Hooker's Boom Boom. This led to a New York engagement for the Shays on NBC TV's Hullabaloo, at the invitation of its host, fellow Canadian Paul Anka. Abandoning the bars on the Strip, Clayton-Thomas began performing in Yorkville Village's coffee houses. He immersed himself in the local jazz and blues scene dominated by the likes of John Lee Hooker, Joe Williams, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGhee, Lenny Breau, Oscar Peterson, and Mo Kaufman. The album, David Clayton-Thomas and the Shays, A Go-Go, was recorded for Roman Records in 1965 and was followed by David Clayton-Thomas Sings Like It Is for the same label in 1966. Clayton-Thomas made his mark more forcibly with his next band, the Bossmen, one of the first rock bands anywhere to include jazz musicians. In 1966, he wrote and performed the R&B-driven anti-war song Brainwashed, which became a major Canadian hit, peaking at number 11 on the national RPM chart. One night in 1966, after sitting in with blues singer John Lee Hooker in Yorkville, Clayton-Thomas left with him for New York. They played a Greenwich Village club for a couple of weeks. Hooker then left for Europe, and Clayton-Thomas stayed on in New York City. He survived by playing basket houses, where performers were given a few minutes of stage time and then passed the basket. Folk singer Judy Collins heard Clayton-Thomas one night at a club uptown and told her friend drummer Bobby Colamy about him. Bobby's band Blood, Sweat and Tears had broken up 4 months after releasing its debut Columbia Records album, Child is Father to the Man. Colamy was impressed with Clayton-Thomas's vocal talent, and he invited him to join the band. They took the reformed group into the Cafe Au Go-Go in the Village. Clayton-Thomas's first album with the band, Blood, Sweat and Tears, which was released in December of 1968, sold 10 million copies worldwide. The record topped the Billboard album chart for 7 weeks and charted for 109 weeks. It won 5 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year and Best Performance by a Male Vocalist. It featured 3 hit singles, You've Made Me So Very Happy, Spinning Wheel, and When I Die. On the Hot 100, each peaked at number 2 and lasted 13 weeks. This featured as well a rendition of Billie Holiday's God Bless the Child. Seeking to capitalize on the newfound fame of the singer in 1969, Decca Records purchased the master tapes of the blues-oriented Roman Records material, dubbed in horns to make it sound more like Blood, Sweat and Tears, and released the album David Clayton-Thomas. Blood, Sweat and Tears would headline at major venues around the world, including Royal Albert Hall, the Metropolitan Opera House, the Hollywood Bowl, Madison Square Garden, and Caesar's Palace, as well as the Newport Jazz Festival and Woodstock. From June to July of 1970, the band went on a United States Department of State sponsored tour of Eastern Europe. Voluntary association with the United States government was highly unpopular with American rock fans who opposed the United States war in Vietnam, and the band was criticized for allowing itself to be co-opted by the United States President Richard Nixon's government. It is now known that the U.S. State Department pressured the group into the tour in exchange for a residency permit for Clayton-Thomas, who had a criminal record in Canada and had been deported from the United States after overstaying his travel visa. The tour and its aftermath is the focus of a 2023 featured-length documentary titled What the Hell Happened to Blood, Sweat and Tears. With Clayton-Thomas fronting the band, Blood, Sweat and Tears continued with a string of hit albums including Blood, Sweat and Tears 3, which featured Carole King's Heidi Ho, and Clayton-Thomas's Lucretia McEvil, and Blood, Sweat and Tears 4, which yielded another Clayton-Thomas penned hit single, Go Down Gamblin', and Lisa Listen to Me. Blood, Sweat and Tears' Greatest Hits album has to date reportedly chalked up over 7 million copies sold worldwide. In the early years, Clayton-Thomas lived on the road, traveling all over Europe, Australia, Asia, South America, and the United States and Canada with Blood, Sweat and Tears. The constant touring began to take its toll. Clayton-Thomas left the band in 1972, exhausted by life on the road. Variety later described Clayton-Thomas's decision to leave as ruining the band who, quote, needed every bit of its sweat and swagger, end quote. By the mid-1970s, the founding members of the band began to drift away to start families and pursue their own musical ambitions. In 1972, Thomas revealed his first Columbia solo album after Blood, Sweat and Tears, simply titled David Clayton-Thomas. In 1973, the second solo album, Tequila Sunrise, was issued by Columbia. In 1974, he issued the Harmony Junction album on RCA Records. In 1975, Thomas returned to front Blood, Sweat and Tears again on the Columbia album's New City, and in 1976, More Than Ever. In 1977, they released Brand New Day on the ABC label. In 1978, Thomas issued another solo album on ABC titled simply Clayton. In 1980, Blood, Sweat, and Tears issued the MCA record album Nuclear Blues, which also included Thomas. Later in the decade, Columbia issued the double live Blood, Sweat, and Tears album, Live and Improvised, again with Thomas. It was reported in the May 30th, 1992 issue of Cashbox that Clayton-Thomas was one of the artists on the Sedona Recording Company roster. In 2004, Clayton-Thomas left New York for Toronto and launched an all-star 10-piece band. He then began touring and recording almost a dozen albums under his own name. So a very long career by David Clayton-Thomas, and discography that spans from 1965 all the way up until 2019. And he's won multiple Grammys throughout his years. He has had songs inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. So a long-lasting career. Obviously, Blood, Sweat, and Tears is one of those big bands. And I just, again, thought it was odd timing that Clive Davis, who signed them and helped work with them, passed away, and then literally a couple days later you have David Clayton-Thomas passing away as well. So a very long career again, and an ability to come out of something negative and make something very positive out of it. It's hard when you come from an abusive household and then you yourself fall into trouble with the law, and it's hard to break that pattern and make something positive out of your life. So for him to be able to, just by chance, find a guitar that an inmate had left and teach himself and really fall in love with that music that his mom had shown him, and make something positive out of his life and make music that impacted people in a positive way. That's just a great story. That's the kind of story you root for, is someone really changing their life around and coming out on top like he did. So sadly, I say again, all condolences to his family and friends and fans. Hopefully this string of impactful people passing away ends and we can get into some more positive things, because I do have some plans for some episodes, but obviously news like this always supersedes anything else I have going on, because it's so important to honor the life of these musicians. So that's all I got for you on this episode. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm Gibbs. This is Gibbs Drops the Needle. Stay safe and be kind.